Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. My name is Mitch Bauer. I run a print shop called Nice Art Prints. And today we're going to talk about how to make your images bigger for print. And we're going to do it without turning them into a pixelated, mushy mess. Yeah. Cool. Today, I would like to thank John, aka _5263T on Instagram. Thank you, John, for trusting me with one of your photos today. This is the photo that we're going to use and print. So follow him on Instagram. Also, like and subscribe this video so that the YouTube algorithm will promote it so more people can see how to make their images big. And soon the world will be filled with giant art. Sounds like a pretty good place to me. Yeah, let's get started. Follow me over to the computer. Here at the computer, we have the image that John gave us. One of the things I really like about this is all the contrast throughout the image. There's a lot of color contrast. You have like greens and reds and blues, and then there's a lot of contrast in the luminance as well. Right here inside of the convenience store that are nice and bright, and you have some very dark areas here in the shadows, as well as the sky, which is pretty dark. It's a great image. Now let's look at the image size itself. So if I open up this image size dialog box, there's a few pieces of information that we can kind of see. It's about 4,000 pixels by 3,200 pixels. Then we move on down, we have the width, the height, and the resolution. So as you can see, it's about 13 inches by 11 inches, about the size of this piece of paper. It's nice. That'd make a pretty good size print, but I want it bigger. I want to make it like 20 inches tall. So it'll be about like 25 inches wide and 20 inches tall. How do we do that? Well, let's look at the next thing down here. We have resolution. Resolution here is described in pixels per inch. If you think about your old computer screens or early iPhone screens before the Retina. Most screens then were 72 pixels per inch. Now with Retina screens, you're around 300 pixels. So those old phones, you look at them and you can kind of see the actual pixels, especially in text. And now when you look at your phone screen, I'm looking for my phone here, you don't see those pixels anymore. And that's because of the higher pixel resolution. Here. This print was made with an image that was 300 pixels per inch. So if you look at a square inch inside of this, it's 300 pixels by 300 pixels. So you multiply those together, you get 90,000 pixels. So every square inch, there's 90,000 pixels. Pretty dense. The reason why 300 pixels per inch keeps coming up over and over again is because that around 240 to 300 pixels per inch is where the human eye no longer sees individual pixels. And at that point, the illusion of continuous color occurs. If you don't take anything away from that last little bit, remember this. If you're gonna print a picture where people are gonna look at it up close, you want your resolution to be at least 300 pixels per inch. Okay, so we know we want this to be 300 pixels per inch, and I want the height to be about 20 inches. So if I just type in 20, what happens here? Look, that's great. Okay, it's about 25 inches wide. Wait a second. The resolution dropped down. So the problem here is that it decreased the resolution and able to compensate for the size. So if we set this back to 300, I don't know, we're back to 10 inches. How do we make up the difference? Well, Photoshop is here to the rescue with this resample option. So when you resample, you're basically telling the computer like, hey, I know I don't have enough pixels to make it this big, but can you make it this big for me? Photoshop's gonna say, sure. I'm gonna look at pixel A and pixel B, and we'll scale it up so they're this far apart, and I'm just gonna interpret all the data between those pixels. Basically, it stretches out the image and then uses an algorithm to fill in the gaps in the stretched image. And you can choose what algorithm you wanna use here. There are a couple options from automatic, preserve details 2.0, etc., 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 etc. What I'm gonna say now is gonna be slightly controversial. This is a section from the original image. This is the size that we're rescaling it to. And these are all the different rescaling algorithms inside of Photoshop. Automatic, bilinear, bicubic smoother, bicubic sharper, bicubic, preserve details 2, nearest neighbor, preserve details. Can you tell a difference between any of them? Probably not. Okay, look, I'm not telling you that there is no difference between all of these algorithms. There definitely is. And for your image, you should go through each one and see what works best. The truth is that for this image, taking it from this size to this size, an increase of about 185%, all of these algorithms perform pretty much the same, but your results may vary. So try them all out. But at the end of the day, every last one of these has something wrong with it. Take a look. Did you see it? They're all soft. All of those images, too soft. Most important thing you have to do after upscaling is sharpen those images. I'm going to show you now how I sharpen them. This is the part that's going to blow your mind. I think. I hope. It should. Okay. The original scale of the image. Boom. Blew it up. I used preserved details. I didn't add any noise reduction because I like to have a little extra control over it. You can actually see over here in my layers, my whole pattern for sharpening. We're going to reduce the noise. Then I'm going to apply a little bit of light sharpening. And then my secret weapon, we're going to add some noise. You may be thinking, Mitch, you're crazy. You might be right, but not about this. So I'm just going to walk through and we're going to rebuild the whole thing right now. That first step, we're going to reduce the noise. Now I've created a new layer and I'm going up here to filter and I'm going to open up Camera Raw filter. For all of this stuff, I actually like working inside of the Camera Raw filter inside of Photoshop. It allows me to make adjustments and see the impact immediately. It runs a little bit faster than doing some of these same sharpening tools inside of Photoshop. I don't know why, maybe Adobe can tell me. I assume because they've optimized Camera Raw. Long story short, you can do all these things with other Photoshop filters. I just like using the Camera Raw filter. We're gonna go here to the Detail tab and down here into Noise Reduction. Let's zoom in. Ooh, yeah. All right, let's look at this first. So this was from a scan. It's a Frontier scan of film, and there's a little bit of color noise going on. So you can see here where it's like green and purple and orange, all in the whites. If you want to see if there's color noise in an image, there are two areas you want to look. Edges. So see the color, any edge like of text, any sharp object with a strong edge, you can look there. And then also in the whites, because that's going to show you where there's like a little color bleed. So as you can see here, there's a little magenta and a little bit of green. And watch this. If I go here to noise reduction and I go down to the color slider, I can pull this all the way over and just like magic, boom, gone. So before, after. And if we zoom out all the way, you can see there's no color cast shift across the whole image. It's just done a beautiful job of removing the little extra colors in the whites and along the edges. So boom. That's step one. Now we're going to adjust the noise in the luminance value. So luminance, just ignore all the colors and look at everything as black and white. So good areas to look for noise in the luminance are gradations and any areas of solid color. So we're going to stay in this area of the picture. We've got this nice solid blue bar here next to the Lawson's logo. And but there's a little detail. It looks like there's a scratch on the sign. So what I'm going to do now as I'm reducing the noise here, all of this is probably grain from the film. As I'm reducing that, I want to make sure I still keep details like this little scratch going across. So I take the luminance noise reduction slider. If I go all the way, you can see it just makes everything look a little too like milky. So I'm going to pull back a little bit. And I'm just going to mess with this a little bit until I get it to a place where I feel like I'm pretty happy with it. All right. I'm just adjusting the detail and the contrast. All right. So all the way over here, you can see all of the grain. This is maybe too far, and I'm going to kind of split the difference here. Now, this might be looking extra soft to you at this point, but don't worry. Right now, all we're worried about, I'm just looking at the details of the grain here, and I'm trying to get to a point where there's just most of the grain disappears. Let's look at a few other parts. Yeah, that looks good. All right. Again, I'm looking at areas where there are lines, where colors meet. Those are the kind of the problem areas when you're reducing noise. And then of course, the sky is usually a good place to look. You can really see the the grain in the sky. So the reason why I am messing with reducing the noise right now is a lot of this noise is actually the grain from the film in the original scan. And as we enlarged it, we not only enlarged the image, we enlarged the grain. Now, if you're enlarging a digital camera, you don't escape this problem as well, because then it's maybe not film grain, but you've got like image noise. We've enlarged the image, but we also enlarged the noise or the grain, and now I need to kind of reduce that. So we can toggle between before and after and see, all right, we reduced the noise, but it has left our image feeling a little bit soft. So how do we get it to feel sharp again? We sharpen. We're not going to go crazy with sharpening. We're just going to do some light sharpening. If I can spell sharpen. Let me show you what I mean by light sharpening. We're going to go back to our favorite tool, the camera raw filter. We're going to go in here and we're going to mess with the sharpening. Again, I like to just push it all the way. Push the sharpening, the slider goes up to 150. I took it to 150. If you look at the before and after, you can see we made the edges maybe a little too crispy. You can see it actually starts to fall apart here along the edges of these letters. So there's before and after. Now I'm not going to worry about pulling this back yet, because I'm going to use these bottom three sliders, radius, detail, and masking, to refine the sharpening. Before we jump into the radius slider, I should explain how sharpening works in this case. So basically what sharpening is doing is it's creating extra contrast along edges. The program is looking for areas of dark and light. So in this case, like this beam going across in the sky, you can see here, if I do before, watch this little edge right where the beam meets the sky. You see how this little halo effect has appeared? That's from the sharpening. Basically what it's doing is it's saying, okay, this area is dark and this area is light, and so I'm going to increase the contrast between the two of them. When you go here to the radius slider, if you increase it, it's going to spread out the area where it applies the contrast. As I spread it out, you can see the halo around this beam gets bigger and smaller. Detail is going to look at the size of an object inside the image. So the higher the detail number, the smaller object sizes it's going to sharpen. And the lower the detail number, it's only going to sharpen large objects. Let's look here in the sky again. You can see all the grain. If I increase the detail slider, it's going to increase the sharpening around the grain. If I lower it, it's not going to sharpen as much. So that's the radius and the detail slider. Masking is going to apply the find edges algorithm, and it's just going to find the edges inside of your picture. A good way to see how this works, if you hold down the Option key on your keyboard and then pull this, you'll see you can go all the way till it selects only the edges, or you can move down and kind of finesse. So these are all ways, radius, detail, and masking, they're all ways you can refine the amount of sharpening and where you're sharpening inside of your image. What I like to do is actually have radius very, very low, because I want to apply sharpening across the entire image. I want sharpening kind of applied everywhere and minimally. With detail as well, like I'm not looking to sharpen the very tiny things and just broad sharpening. So my detail is usually pretty low as well. And then masking, I don't want to mask off parts of the image. I want it to sharpen pretty much the whole thing. I'm going to kind of play around here until I find something that feels good. So I'm looking again in the edges here. You can see it's a little bit like crispy. See how it starts to fall apart here? So I'm just kind of refining things until I get it all to a point where it doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to feel like it's like 90% of the way there. So that feels pretty good to me. You'll notice when I zoom in here, there's still a few little areas that are crunchy. Don't worry about that. We're going to fix it. So now we've lightly sharpened. Next up, we're going to add some noise. And this is probably the part where you're thinking like, what, Mitch, why would you add noise to an image? You don't want to make an image worse. Well, actually, this noise is going to make it better. My background is in compositing. You take multiple images and put them together and make them look like they were a single image. As the last step of compositing, you usually apply like a color grade and some grain as a way to make the whole thing feel cohesive. I'm going to show you now how the grain is actually going to work to make this image feel sharper and make the gradations feel a little bit smoother. It's going to blow your mind. Add noise. And in we go. Let's go to a different part of the image for this, just so we can switch it up a bit. This is a good area. Cool. I'm going to go here to the FX tab, to grain. And if we pull the grain all the way up, boom. Looks like it's like a visco filter. You can really see the sliders below amount on grain are size. That's pretty straightforward. Adjust the size of the grain. Oof, that's pretty big grain. And roughness changes the grain from being very uniform. So you'll see this all looks the same to being random in size. So some grain is big, some grain is small. The size we're going to pull way down. Really far down. Cool. So we're like at 3. And now I'm going to adjust the amount of grain. If you're looking here along these edges, again, when you're sharpening, you should always be looking for a lot of like big flat areas, because that's where a lot of the errors are going to show up. And then you go back and you look at the whole. So in this rectangle here, you can see these edges are really rough and they're kind of like crunchy, especially on this one. This is a good example. And what happens is you have these kind of smooth areas of color, and they're interrupted by any areas where there's a gradation from a lighter to a darker or a darker to a lighter color, and it just starts to get choppy. And what the grain does when we turn it on, it smooths out the choppiness. So look at that again. Before and after. The grain has basically, by putting in all these little pieces of grain, it creates a new path for your eyes to break up the gradation. You've gone from areas where it's like this is all one color blue and then there's a darker blue, to oh, these are all several different colors of blue. Oh, and there's a darker blue there. It just feels a lot easier on your eyes. And so when I'm adjusting the grain, I want to find a balance to where here that effect doesn't work, and when I move it up, it just barely starts to hide all those little chunky bits. And this is the part when we do the fun before and after. Here it's scaled back on the screen and you toggle between, you're not going to see any real difference. But when we zoom in at 100%, this is where we'll start to see an actual difference. So we're back here at the Lawson sign. This is the original after the resize, and this is after we've done everything. Pretty cool, huh? So pay attention to, let's look at the color first along the white. If you remember, we had like all these little spots of green and magenta just kind of popping around. Those are gone. Now look at the edges along the letters. See how these edges feel a little bit jaggedy? They don't feel jaggedy anymore. Boom. That is how you resize an image. Let's print this thing. Well, as that's printing out and we're wrapping up the video, I just want to say thank you to John for letting me print your image this week. I'll be sending it out to you in the mail, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed working with the image and printing it. If you would like me to print one of your pictures, follow me on Instagram at niceartprints and send me a message with the picture you'd like printed and a little description of why you want the picture printed and what that picture means to you. My plan is each week to print one of these images and teach a printing principle along with it. So this week was all about upscaling your images. Next week is, I don't know, it depends on the image. And please make sure to like and subscribe here so that YouTube will share this video with everybody else. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hit me up with your questions and comments on printing, and yeah, I'll see you down there.